Glad you asked some of the best, because I can't just pick one or two. There's a lot that I've pulled out that I think will really help students be able to get information stuck in mind and then pull it out later in the exam. So the first couple I want to talk about are distributed practice and spaced learning, or spacing effect. I know that sometimes we have to cram because there's a lot of content and exams are in short periods of time, but that's actually not ideal. You want to be spacing out your learning as much as possible so that you have content coming in over a long period of time, and give yourself space between learning intervals to kind of forget some of the information and then refresh that memory trace. Having them kind of fade away and then refresh them by reviewing your information actually solidifies that memory trace. So it's going to be more likely to come to mind later when you think about content again. So if you're looking at the chart on the screen, the purple bar represents participants who did one session of study 1 hour a day. And then we can compare that to 2 sessions, 1 hour a day, or 1 session, 2 hours a day, versus 2 sessions, 2 hours a day. We can see those short sessions where you do 1 hour per day, you get to criterion learning over 80% pretty quickly. The time where you're spending 2 hours a day, like our blue bar, it's taking you a long time to reach not even the same level of understanding as we did in those shorter sessions across a longer period of time. We have strategies to get information stuck in mind as well. So ways to help you actually learn the content and have it in mind so that you can pull it up later at the exam. So the best way, like the top way to have information become memorable, is to elaborately encode it. So what do I mean by elaborately encode? There's a lot of ways we can elaborate on information, and I put a few on screen there for you. But ideally, you want to be linking information to anything you already have in mind, any kind of concepts or ideas or experiences that you already have stored in mind. That's going to increase emotional relevance and arousal, as you see later on the screen. So elaborately encoding actually hits a lot of different ways that our cognitive system, kind of biases and heuristics we use to help get at information and store information. So thinking about concepts across classes, like if you're taking a psych class, for example, not only thinking about how this concept applies to this class, but reminding yourself, oh, Professor so-and-so came up with this concept in that class as well. And it relates to my friend who did this thing this once. That's all elaborately encoding. And those are giving you retrieval cues to get at that information later once you're at the exam. Summarizing information in your own words is also a way to elaborately encode. So verbatim typing while your professor is talking is not ideal. And there's other evidence to show that that actually doesn't get information in mind. You're not processing it. You're just listening to the sensory information and outputting sensory information. But if you have to think about it, summarize it in your own words, that's a form of elaborate encoding, and then output it. That's essentially 2 study sessions with that information as it was coming into the system. So increasing personal relevance, and then emotion, arousal, and distinctiveness. Those are all ways that you can elaborately encode and also increase those retrieval cues. So I really like tying things to people I know, experiences I had, and that makes it very memorable. You can even come up with bizarre events. Like if you're trying to memorize lists of items, you can put them in bizarre objects or have really crazy rhymes that will make it memorable. Emotion and arousal and distinctiveness are cues as well. There's ways that we can actually kind of grab that to our benefit, not only through study cards and notes that a lot of us already know, but using locations as a distinct study tool. So we're all stuck in our home in the pandemic. You can use the living room as chapter 1 and chapter 2, and you only study the chapter 1 and 2 in the living room. Now when you're in your exam, you're like, oh, geez, I know this comes from the living room. And you put yourself mentally in the living room and you're able to get at that information that's stored in the mind. Same thing with smell. If you study with a particular perfume or with coffee, have that at your exam because that will be a retrieval cue to the information. There's also evidence to show that chewing mint gum, but not cinnamon or fruit gum, can actually benefit memory performance as well, as long as you have it during study and during test. So then testing, we have a lot of time between now and getting to our finals where we have a chance to improve our testing abilities, and improving or practicing testing will also get information stuck in mind. So we have different types of tests will require kind of different types of learning to help you get at that information. So it's important for you to continually test really core information that you think is going to be on your exam. That repeated testing we talked about earlier is going to get that information stuck in mind. And I have some more evidence of that. So on this chart here, the chart on the left shows that everybody in all 4 conditions learned to criterion. They learned everything that they had to learn. But what's different is at the 1 week retention interval chart. The first 2 bars are people who studied information and tested themselves. The SNT is they studied and they dropped items that they knew, but they continued to test themselves. And then the bottom 2 bars, they just studied, not a lot of testing. And then the bottom last bar, they just studied, dropped what they knew, but didn't do any testing. And what's really important to note is those that had some testing have far more retention and understanding of the information after 1 week than those who just repeatedly studied and didn't actually test. So if you have access to test banks online, quizzes, if there's questions in the back of your chapters to help you practice, go and do those testing materials, because that's going to help with retention and make that information come to mind a lot easier during your exams. When it comes to short answer tests, context is going to be helpful here. So that's where you're thinking about placing yourself in the situation where you learned the information. Like if you're studying chapter 1 and 2 in the living room and you have a short answer question, mentally place yourself on that couch, or even in the pandemic, if you can walk yourself to where you actually studied it, having that context around you is going to activate those memories and help you get at that information that you've stored in mind. And then errors will always persist unless you're given corrective feedback. So if your prof has given you the opportunity to exam review, or hey, here's the answers to the quiz, you should look over them, absolutely do that, because those errors in mind will continue. You'll pull them up on your final exam, you'll hold them after your final exam until they're edited. The brain is very good at editing out inaccurate information. We just have to tell it, hey, that was inaccurate, get out. So overall, we want to be increasing retrieval cues. That's kind of a lot of what I've been talking about, like gum and smell and context and linking to people you know. Those are all essentially are retrieval cues. So that little guy in the bottom of the pile, he's searching your mind for the right information, and there's all of these papers of information around. You want to have the paper stick out, be a bright color, be really emotional so that you can grab at it and pull it out when you need it, right? So those retrieval cues can be anything as long as you deem it a retrieval cue. I use colors in my study methods where all my notes are just blank, and then I highlight the things that are difficult with yellow because it's a really nice, easy color. And then the things that I get right, I leave yellow, but I take an orange highlighter now and I highlight over the yellow ones that are wrong. So now they're a different color. So when I'm sitting in my exam, I'm like, oh, this was an easy one. It's yellow. And I can, oh, now I'm at the information. Or this was a really hard one. It was brown. And now I can come up with the information. But I've used that strategically as a cue. Students have reported using library levels as a retrieval cue. They're like, this is a level 6 library chapter. I should know this information. Mentally put themselves there, and now the information can come to mind. So there's some ideas on screen for you to try and increase your own retrieval cues, but again, anything can be a retrieval cue. The last thing is to increase motivation, especially in the times of the pandemic. So motivation has like an indirect effect on performance and memory and learning. It's not that you're motivated, you're going to do super well, but you're motivated so that you learn more often, you retrieve better, you sleep better, all of these things. So it's an indirect relationship to your overall performance. So take some time to remind yourself why you're doing school, why you're here in a pandemic and putting yourself through all of this stress. You're working, you're improving yourself, you're doing it for your family, whatever your motivations are, remind yourself, because that's going to have a really good indirect effect in the amount of time and attention you place on your studies and getting through exams. I want to end with some health and lifestyle kind of strategies as well. We can't ignore the body, right? We have a beautiful brain, but it's in this organic body that we also have to take care of. So exercise, getting out, it's a safe thing to do in the pandemic, as long as you're doing it outside, socially distanced, wear a mask when you need to. That good cardiovascular health gives you good cerebrovascular health as well. So good brain blood flow. Diet and nutrition, making sure that you're eating properly to support all that thinking and learning that you're doing. And high anxiety and stress actually has a big negative impact on performance. So I want to call your attention to the chart in the bottom corner there. This is referred to as the Yerke-Dodson law, where we see that some arousal is beneficial to performance. We can see this would be like, oh man, I really should study. My finals are coming. Oh, I'm kind of behind in class. I better finish my chapter readings. And we're getting more stressed, like the pandemic has hit me and my car broke down. and I'm really behind on class and I haven't done any of my assignments now. And oh my God, I think I'm going to fail out of university. I'm never going to get through the pandemic. I'm going to be a loser and die and never get a job. This is no longer beneficial to performance once you've hit this peak, right? This was keeping you focused. Oh, I better get to school. I better focus on my schoolwork. I have a lot to do. I should do it. And now you're panicking. This has a negative impact on performance. So we want to keep stress in a beneficial way, not in this detrimental area, right? Some anxiety and some stress is actually beneficial. It focuses you, it keeps you on task, it makes your cognitions really focus on what you should be doing. But again, there is a peak where there's too much. So that's when you go take some exercise, go have some self-care, make sure that you bring that back into a facilitative range. For those who have test anxiety, there is kind of one intervention that's pretty easy to do. Right before you're writing your exam, when you're feeling all stressed about the exam, sit down and write down what you're feeling. Don't explain how or why you feel this way. Just write down what you're feeling. Like, I'm clammy, my heart is racing. I don't feel like I'm going to do this. I'm all sweaty. Just put down on paper, write what you're feeling. Read it. And then usually by the time you've got it written down and read it, your body response has declined. You can crumple it up, throw it away, and enter that exam with a lot less anxiety and a lot more on this end of the curve. And that is one that's been proven. It's kind of empirically proven out there for individuals with test anxiety. I don't know how well that'll work in the pandemic, but that's true for when you're coming up to an exam and you're sitting outside the exam, getting those emotions out. Environmental factors. This one's gonna be really important for situations of learning in the pandemic. Not only during studying, like usually I tell students to make sure you have an effective study location, but an effective test taking location as well. So it would be ideal to keep that rhythm going in your mind so that your brain can keep pulling out that information as quickly and accurately as possible. Stopping that rhythm, you have to get back into that rhythm of testing again, and it's just going to be kind of detrimental to your performance or take you longer to get through the exam. And lastly, there's a lot of information online about nootropics. They're not regulated by the government the way that other medications are because they're natural substances. But part of the problem with that is that they're not regulated by the government. So you don't know what's in them and you don't really know the long-term implications of what these nootropics could do. So although they're saying they come from plants and they come from natural substances, plants have very real actions on the body and brain. I listened to a podcast, for example, of a couple of gentlemen who tried modafinil, and it started out like they were feeling pretty focused, but then, and it was a regular dose that they took, they had to end their podcast at the end because they were just like off onto tangents, organizing their music library instead of actually doing any kind of podcast. And when they came back a couple days later, they're like, we do not recommend modafinil as a way to study and stay focused. So I would not recommend ordering these or using them to try and help you through studying. They're not regulated the way medications should be. Lastly, I would like to prescribe sleep. Sleep is one of the most important things to actually getting information stuck in mind. Sleep consolidates memory. When you're resting and REM sleep is occurring, your neurons are actually firing information and moving that information into other parts of the brain for later storage. So if you don't have REM sleep, you learn nothing. You're not actually filing those memories back for long-term storage. So ideally what you want to do is have a good study session where you're elaborately encoding information, making links to personal connections, you're doing short intervals, right, an hour or two, taking a break, having a snack. After a good study session, nap, then get back up and repeat. So then students always ask me when I get up to this part, how do I nap? When I wake up, I feel terrible, like I was hit by a truck. You're just napping wrong. Like, you just got to figure out your napping sweet spot. So here would be one full sleep cycle, right? And we can see the time. This is on average, 90 minutes for most people is one full sleep cycle. But you can stop your sleep cycle, your nap, depending on the goals of what you're trying to do with your nap. So here we like the power nap, 10 to 20 minutes. This one is where you basically just kind of fall asleep and you stay asleep just, long enough to kind of get down into a restful cycle and you pop back up into wakefulness. And that I've used those when like you're just feeling groggy, but you still have things you have to do to accomplish your day. Not super high taxing learning, but still some things you got to do. 30 minutes here. If you wake up when you're down in this kind of slow wave sleep, this is when you might feel more groggy. This is like where people are like, I woke up and I felt like a bus hit me. You need to be waking up closer to these kind of stages of sleep. This is kind of called twilight sleep. That's where you're like, you wake up and you're like, oh, should I wake up now or can I go back to sleep? That would be ideal for you to be like, oh, I'm going to wake up instead of going back to sleep. That's in that kind of twilight phase. You won't feel like a bus hit you at that point. But if you go back to sleep and then something wakes you up like a bang outside and you're down into this lower slow wave sleep, then you'll wake up feeling super groggy and like, oh, I should not have had that nap. Because your brain didn't get a chance to finish filing all these files and cycle back up into wakefulness. It just was like, we're filing, whoa, we're up into wakefulness. And so you feel like a bus hit you. So then after you've done, say, a full study session, you've covered a few chapters and you're like, man, I studied a lot and I want to actually have some brain space available later to watch a movie or to study more. Give yourself a full 90 minutes. So I don't set my timer for 90 minutes. I set my timer for literally 96 or 97 minutes because I know it's going to take me 3 or 4 to fall asleep on either end. So then that gives me a bit of a window. And then again, if you start waking up, feeling that twilight sleep before your alarm goes off, don't say, oh, I'm going to sleep until my alarm goes off. Say, oh, I'm kind of awake. It's time to get up. That's going to keep you rested.